we are living in a time when this abortion movement has become a massive industry, has become a reflection of our culture. And if you look back a little bit, you can see what the pieces were that sort of came together to build the platform on which this whole thing stands. Let me just see if I can't share some of them with you. This whole commitment to abortion started. Step one was the sexual revolution. The sexual revolution, which basically said, we want to be free to express ourselves sexually. You go back to the early 60s, everybody's got to be engaged in free love. Remember the expression free love? You remember all the hippies and that whole thing. The sexual revolution spawned abortion as an industry because it basically said we have to be free to express ourselves sexually and we don't really need to be dealing with the consequences. In fact, they would go so far as to say, if we're going to be free, we women certainly can't be victimized by men. Men can jump in and out of bed with anybody they want all day long and walk away and there aren't any consequences to them. But what happens to us is we get pregnant. And so their freedom has no impingement. Their freedom has no consequence. Their freedom has no detrimental results. But our freedom does. So in order for us to be really free, you've got to eliminate the consequence, the major consequence of free sex, free love, and that is you've got to be able to eliminate pregnancy. Otherwise, we become victimized by men, and we don't want to be victimized by men. So the sexual revolution with its free love really set the stage for the massacring of millions of babies who were nothing but an intrusion in the fornications and the adulteries of a wretched, degenerate society. Then there was a second thing that jumped onto the bandwagon, apart from this whole free love thing, and that was the deformities issue. And you all remember back in the 60s, the big issue about thalidomide. Many women took thalidomide because it was a birth-enhancing drug and it would allow them to get pregnant, whereas they otherwise may not be able to. And you also remember that thalidomide had some severe side effects in terms of limbless children that were born. And there were some medical doctors in England who believed that these deformities and other deformities were serious enough to lead them to argue for eugenic abortions. And that, of course, came out of England, as I said, eliminating birth defect children because of the cost on society, because of the trouble they give to parents. They're difficult to deal with. They have all kinds of problems with these children. So we ought to come along and say, look, there's no sense in bringing deformed children into the world. It's a tough enough place anyway. And so they jumped on the bandwagon for their agenda's sake and mounted, as it were, more arguments for abortion. And then came along the whole feminist movement. And the feminist movement took the expression of sexual freedom one step beyond. And they basically said, we not only want to be sexually free without consequence, but we want to be able to put on our blue suit and take our briefcase and go to work every day too. We want to compete in a man's world as equals, and if we have to have babies, we can't do that. Women are not equal, they said, and I'm quoting, to men unless they are rid of childbearing responsibilities. Betty Friedan, who was a leader of the feminist movement, said, quote, women must have abortion as a backup to contraceptive failure. Contraception first, and if it doesn't work, then abortion, because we can't be bothering with children. We got to go to work and make our way in a man's world. So you had the sexual revolution compounded by this sort of genetic game playing from those people who wanted to eliminate the deformed from society, and adding to that compound problem is the third feature, which is the feminist argument that if we're going to work in a man's world and be equal to men in every way, we can't be fussing around at home with kids, so we got to eliminate them from our lives. Then you had another component. Another piece came into the platform from the population control advocates who were telling us that we were all going to be standing on each other's head if we kept having babies. We were all going to be crushing each other out of existence because the world was going to be overpopulated. And I read all of that. Don't you remember reading that in the 60s? Everyone was screaming about overpopulation. I remember finding an old book that was written in 1918 in which a man had said, if something doesn't change, we have too many horses in the streets of Chicago, and at the projected rate it's going right now, in another 25 years, the city of Chicago will be 18 foot deep in manure. It's the same kind of reasoning. We're all going to drown in a sea of babies. And all of this fed the building of this platform. It was all material fed into this building project to build the platform upon which the Roe versus Wade legalized abortion verdict came down in January 1973. And at that point, the Supreme Court of the United States excluded unborn children from the protection of the 14th Amendment, which says no person shall be deprived of life without due process of law. And they said, unborn children aren't persons. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And we'll see that in a minute. One of the professors at the Master's College, Dr. John Pilkey, very astute, teaches in our English Lit department, wrote me a little memo. Listen to what it says. The phrase pro-choice, which is what the pro-abortionists use, the phrase pro-choice strikes me as one of the most depraved, apocalyptically wicked rhetorical facts in the history of Western civilization in the Christian era. The phrase means pro-sin, or free to choose sin. The phrase would actually be less dreadful if it were pro-abortion, because that would confine it to the sphere of a particular moral problem. But by turning it to what seems a euphemism, the pro-choice people have rung the final rhetorical death knell to the entire democratic experiment. The phrase pro-choice means without conscience, or without inhibition, or without restraint. And it parades itself under the Jeffersonian banner of liberty of conscience and separation of church and state. As a rhetorical gesture, perfectly designed to function as a political banner, this phrase constitutes the last word, the official formulation of official apostate defiance against the God of Christianity. Then he said, I'm confident that God will answer it apocalyptically. Yes, I believe he's right. I believe abortion is the last official stand of the defiant apostate against God. It says, God, you will not determine who lives or dies, I will. The ultimate apostasy. That's where we are in our culture. And we're there by law. The law of our own government. The court ignored the issue of when life begins, which is a medical scientific issue. Even though criminals have been successfully prosecuted for killing unborn children in an attack on a pregnant mother, that child is considered a non-person if its own mother decides to kill it. If a criminal kills it, they're prosecuted. If the mother kills it, it's a non-person. As far as I can tell, and my research may not be exhaustive, but as far as I can tell, there is no nation on the face of the earth with a more permissive abortion policy than the United States, with the single exception of China. It is reflective of our prurient, lascivious, immoral, perverted sexual revolution, of the deviation from God-ordained role for men and women. It is reflective of our selfish, materialistic value system. It is reflective, most of all, of our atheistic ethic hostile to God. And we now have a Holocaust. And we have a Holocaust which God will judge, and I'll talk about that tonight. And I'll talk about what it means that the blood of the murdered victim cries out from the ground against the one